In the morning, nature begins to awaken in Strunjan Landscape Park. When most of the inhabitants of the park are still sleeping, the first to arise are the fishermen, who leave for work early in the morning. Strunjan Landscape Park is a special place among natural parks in Slovenia, since it is the only one with access to the sea. With 4 kilometers of unspoiled shore, this is the most biodiverse area of the Slovenian Sea, and it is also exceptional with regard to the whole Gulf of Trieste. The Slovenian coast is made up of Flysch Eocene sedimentary rock. Harder sandstone and softer marl alternate in almost horizontal layers. Flysch walls steeply overhang the sea, some of them up to 80 meters high. The Flysch cliff is left to natural processes. Under the influence of the wind, the sea, the sun and the rain, the brittle layers of rock burst, crumble and break away from the wall. Such deposited sandstone fragments at the foot of the cliff come into contact with sea waves, tirelessly rolling the rocks back and forth, grinding their sharp edges until they are smoothed out and transformed into coin-shaped round and flat pebbles that form a characteristic rocky coast. During storms, streams and river deposit large quantities of loamy material and clay sludge into the sea. Small particles are washed out of the marl layers of the cliff by rain, wind and waves. If after the storm we look at the sea, this can be observed in the form of white, foggy zones on the water surface. Water currents and wind take particles deep into the open sea, where they sink to the seabed. Often, this is one of the causes of poor visibility in the sea. In individual sections of the sea, different types of seabed and living conditions create a collage of living environments with a lively animal and plant world. For the exploration and admiration of the underwater world, we only need a mask and a snorkel. When we dive below the sea level, we find ourselves in a completely different world that captures our imagination and fills us with excitement and the desire for exploration. The rhythm of life in the tidal belt is determined by the rising and falling of the tide. There are marine organisms that spend the low tide in dry conditions, where they are exposed to strong sun and drying, and they must resist strong waves at high tide. If we go to the shore at the time of low tide, we will notice small crustaceans on the rocks, called barnacles. In unfavorable conditions, they retreat into their shells and open only when submerged in the sea. The smallest marine snail, only a few millimeters large, is called the periwinkle, and more noticeable are the cone-shaped gastropods called limpets and turbinate monodonts, which represent the typical inhabitants of the tidal belt. Here we can also notice little globs of mucus. These are sea anemone, the most notable of which is the beadlet anemone. It is closed in the daytime, but at night, at high tide, it opens up and extends its tentacles to catch small organisms. On the solid seabed, there are organisms that require a solid foundation for growth. Stone floors are mostly covered with algae and sponges, while larger stones and boulders conceal fish and crabs. Some blocks of rock are so large that they protrude out from the sea surface, and their tops are often resting places for Mediterranean shagbirds. The most common sponge on the rocky seabed is the yellow tube sponge, which contributes to the vibrant seabed collage its striking yellow color, along with other sponges of darker colors or more vibrant shades. Sponges are filters of seawater. A single sponge can pump up to 2,000 liters of water a day. Some sponges prefer the shade, so they can often be found under stones. Remember that after observing, we must always put the stone back into its place, since these sponges would not survive in the sunlight. Among the plants on the hard seabed, there are well-known brown algae of the genus Cystostera, which make up dense forests. In the summer, all that is left of the Cystostera are their stumps, from which new algae will grow next spring. The peacock's tail is an alga that is well visible on the rocky seabed due to its white color, and was named for its fan-shaped form. The palate of the seabed is also made up of several green and red algae. Bigger stones and rocks offer hiding places for larger fish. Since there are few holes and crannies, a fish such as the brown wrasse has a difficult time finding suitable hiding places. It lives a solitary life and was named for its dark color. Brown meagres live in smaller shoals and like to stay in permanent homes. They regularly change watch so they can warn others of danger and hide deeper into the hiding place. The Mediterranean rainbow wrasse is a thermophilic species and therefore not always present in the northern Adriatic. The painted comber, named for its vibrant colours, is not a timid species and often allows us to take a closer look. The adjacent steep slopes between the hard and soft seabed are inhabited by flocks of Mediterranean damselfish, which are considered the only type of coral fish in the Slovenian Sea. The damselfish offspring stay together after hatching and are recognized by their vivid blue color. The Mediterranean stony coral most often inhabits rocks or larger stones. The stony coral does not tolerate longer periods of high temperatures. If the coral is completely white, it means that the temperature extremes have caused its death. The periods of high temperatures have become more and more frequent in recent times. On the rocky seabed, we often notice fish from the family of Sparidae, such as the annular sea bream, sharp-snout sea bream, two-handed sea bream, or the gilt-head bream, which often stays near grassy and sandy seabeds. The sponge crab usually crafts its hood from different types of sponges to hide from intruders. Very often it takes on a sponge of the orange tunicate, fixing it firmly on its back with the hind legs. The protection is very advantageous on the sandy seabed, especially during feeding. After finishing its meal, it quickly returns to its shelter in the rocky seabed. Crabs from the family of the spider crabs conceal themselves by covering their shells and legs in various organisms that are inedible to predators. Despite its distinctly red mouth, the red-mouthed goby blends perfectly with the environment. The greatest masters of concealment are certainly cephalopods. The common cuttlefish uses its ability to change color to perfectly blend with its surroundings. It moves in such a way that a water jet is pressed out of the body, propelling it in the opposite direction. Such lunging movement is very effective in hunting prey or escaping from predators. On the sandy seabed, we can often notice swarms of mullets using the mouth to separate the sand from organisms, which are their food. A typical representative of the sandy seabed is the great weaver, which buries itself in the soft floor in the event of danger. The soft seabed is also a suitable living space for other organisms, such as the sole, which can bury and hide in a soft base. Red mullets feed on small invertebrates buried in the soft seabed. They dig through the floor with long barbels growing under the mouth. We can often spot colourful empty shells of dead mussels and snails. The shells can be attached to the seabed or buried in sand or silt. In the summer, due to the lack of oxygen on the seabed, some shells crawl to the surface, such as scallops that can move along the seabed by opening and closing their shells, thus escaping the intruder. Comb jellies are jellyfish-like organisms, transparent and about 10 centimeters large. The Nemiopsis legii species of comb jelly are considered to be invasive, as they ravenously consume plankton. They are non-hazardous to swimmers, but the same cannot be said for the fish population, since they do feed on fish eggs. They began to appear massively in our seas during the last few years. The shallow sandy bottom hosts seaweed and is dominated by Samidosea nodosa. They only appear up to a depth of 8 meters, where they still get enough light for photosynthesis. Seagrass often harbours fish with long horizontal lines along the body. These are Salima porgy fish, which like to graze on underwater meadows. Here, we may also spot the largest Mediterranean shell, the fan mussel, which can grow up to 1 meter in height. The Mediterranean fanworm is the largest tube worm that can be found in the seagrass. Its conical gills, twisted in a spiral and brightly coloured, assist with feeding on plankton. In case of danger, they are retracted back into their tube. In the Slovenian Sea, silt seabed is the most common. At first glance, the area more closely resembles the surface of the Moon than the planet Earth. The deeper we dive, the less sunlight we get, which is why some shades of colour are lost as well. In this seemingly modest area, we can see a lot of animals crawling along the ground or digging into it. Often we can find brittle stars, tunicates, starfish, and sea anemone. Strunjan is the only sea lagoon on the Slovenian coast. For a long time, until the middle of the last century, it served as a sustainable fish farm. Today, it is part of the nature reserve and an ecologically important Natura 2000 site. Strunjan is very shallow. The movement of the water depends on the tide. At the bottom it is overgrown by an underwater meadow, which provides shelter to many animal species, especially the European bass and gilt-head bream, and many other species of fish that spawn in the lagoon. The only fishermen who are allowed to catch fish in the lagoon are birds, especially at the tide when food is easier to access. In the protected marine area, only commercial fishermen are allowed to fish a few months a year. In the remaining months, however, fishing in the park is not allowed to increase the fish population. Coastal fishermen use small fishing boats most often with gill nets. In the central part of the reserve, in the Bay of the Holy Cross, the ban on fishing lasts all year. The area is more commonly known as the Moon Bay. Sport fishing is allowed only from the coast, from Padzuk to the start of the natural reserve. It is prohibited to catch fish among the mussel farms, since the area is protected as a fishing reserve. Sports fishermen in the park most often fish from the coast in autumn. Most often they are looking to catch some bream or bass, although there are often some other species on the hook, such as mullet or porgy. Within the Fish MPA Blue 2 project, a catch inventory was carried out. The participants were coastal fishermen from the municipalities of Piran and Isola, who often fish in the park. Various data was recorded, such as the quantity of individual fish species, the method of fishing, location and data about how long the fishermen had left nets in the sea. The long-term goal of the project is to preserve biodiversity and natural ecosystems by strengthening the management and networking of protected areas in the Mediterranean. The project involved 11 protected Mediterranean areas.
Good morning, my name is Antonio Di Franco and I'm from the e-commerce lab at the University of Nice, France. We are here, we are the colleagues from the same lab in Nice and some other colleagues from the CONISMA, which is another research institution in Italy, because we are collaborating with the Strunjan Park in a project funded by the MED program, which is named Fish MPA Blue 2. And its aim is to assess which are the governance tools which are responsible of good management of small-scale fisheries in marine protected areas. So in the next 3-4 days we'll be here in order to perform an ecological monitoring of the park, and specifically we'll be carrying out underwater visual census in order to assess the fish assemblages in different zones of the park, so in the taking the buffer and also outside. And we'll be using also some other techniques like the baited underwater video cameras in order to assess the fish assemblages in terms of species richness, density, size and violence of the fish, and to finally assess the ecological effectiveness of the marine park. And we'll be also having information regarding some predators, which are the good descriptor of the ecological effectiveness of the marine protected areas.
Šibiški dan se začne tako, da za nas, ki lovimo stoječimi mrežami, kar pomeni neškodljiva tehnika, se začne, da proti večeru vržemo mreže, položimo mreže pač v morje in zjutraj, zdaj odvisno kakor kjer je ni prej, ni kasneje, dvignemo, očistimo ribe, damo v zaboje in prodamo vsak po svoje, kakor lahko, ribanice, gostilne in tako se dan ponovi. Najboljše obdobje za ribolov je zadnji let je tam nekje konec septembra, oktobra, ko pridejo orade z Italije gor in gre pa na dopust na Hrvaško. In kar se da ujeti takrat orad, če pridejo. Eno leto je, eno leto ni, zdaj odvisno. Novembra so listi, decembra listi pa so pašere, vmes je januar, februar bi mogli biti tudi kakšni riboni vmes. Pa celo leto pa so kakšne salpe, špari, razne ribe vmes, kar je, ampak nič več velikih količin, ampak cipli recimo lahko pridejo v kakšnih večjih količinah, ampak to je bolj poredko. Mi mreže uporabljamo stoječe mreže, to so pešaljere, troslojne pa barakude enoslojne. Te pešaljere so za liste, v glavnem take pridnene, ki so na dnu, v blatu, ko letijo. Za te ribe, ko so orade, bela riba pa, ki plava bolj hitro, pa je barakuda najboljše. Drugače se po vsaki mreži vse pride več ali manj. Po mojih pojmih, če imamo večje očesa, so večje ribe, ne? Torej manjše grejo naprej za naslednje leto. Zdaj, če bi celo Jadransko morje, Italijani, Hrvati in mi to delali, bi sigurno bil uspeh, do nekaj letih bi bilo več ribe. Vsaj take srednje velikosti, kar pomeni dobro. Jaz se še ukvarjam s školjkarstvom, imam eno parcelo gojitev eno tlele v Strunjanskem zalivu. tako da malo kompenziramo, ko ni ribe, da delamo še školjkami, ali pa jih obratno, kakor je kdaj. To tam tudi pobiramo mladice, nasadimo na vrstah, obešamo v takih grozdih in pol one pride ven, zlezejo v 5-6 mesecih, pa treba to dvigniti, spet dati to večjo mrežo, večjo cev, tako da 3-4krat pa gre v prodajo. Školjke pa rastejo leto in pol do 2, tako da pride lepe velike.
Not only the lives of fishermen, but also every individual and every living creature in the world depends on the balance in nature. Sustainable care for nature and awareness of the importance of preserving the sea and the entire planet will help us to be able to admire the magical underwater world for a long time.